Hello, welcome. I'm Chris Cook. I'm one of the editors at Tortoise. I'll be chairing today's Thinking, which is an open news thinking. So the idea of it is fundamentally, this is an opportunity for us to use you to do work for us. That's the key takeaway here. The idea of the Thinking is one of the core things we do at Tortoise. The idea is that instead of simply having journalists talking to one another and discussing among themselves what we think the priorities are, we should come to you, to our members, and find out what you think it is that we should be talking about. We have very developed views on pagination and font layout, but we aren't very good when it comes to other things. I think I'm just quickly checking. I've got other things I want to tell you. We're all Zoom veterans now, but if you want to make a point to us all, there is a chat box at the right-hand side on my screen, which will let you make points that you perhaps don't want to make on camera, but I reserve the right to come and pester you and try and make you speak on camera, even so. If there's something you'd like to say to everyone, if you click on the Participants tab, you'll see that there's a little raise hand button. So what that lets you do is that lets you notify me that there's something you'd like to say. I have to warn you, this obviously will mean we'll get to see the inside of your house. Maybe you think that's a feature, not a bug. But to begin with, can I ask you all just to show me that you can see how to raise your hands? So can I ask you all just to put your hands up? Look at that, some real seasoned pros. We'll just put our hands up. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. So the raise your hand thing is in participants, and then raise your hand. So the idea of this is, as I say, that we should try and sort of draw on your expertise and knowledge to find out what we should be talking about. There's obviously one really big, obvious story at the moment. Actually, it's so overwhelming and so all-encompassing, it's sort of quite hard to know where to start, especially with the Prime Minister in hospital. I guess one of the first questions I really got, one of the things I'm really keen to find out from you is what you think we should be doing right now on the crisis. It's really difficult to find ways of reporting safely at the moment. I was really struck that when the news of the gigantic hospital being built in East London was first filtering out, my first thought was, oh great, well I'll just go over and look and check it's true, but obviously we can't do that. Similarly, lots of our other things that we would want to do, we're finding difficult because of how we report things safely has changed. And so what the things you would want to see is really a really big question for us. My colleague Liz is going to be moderating in parallel sort of a conversations in the chat bar. So do dive in. So I guess the first thing really here, which I'm probably going to go and pester one of my colleagues about to pick up, is really what we do, how we should be thinking about the fact that the Prime Minister is in St Thomas's Hospital in an intensive care ward. I've just finished being in the lobby briefing, which I hope is finished because I'm about to say what they've just said, which I'm not allowed to do till after the lobby briefing. But the big news from there is really that there's been no substantive change to where we were this morning. We're getting this very mysterious message that they won't really tell us how well he is, but he's in good spirits. He's on an intensive care ward. I don't really believe anyone's in good spirits on an intensive care ward, but we are where we are. So I thought I'd start by coming to my colleague James, who usually does this to us. To ask him what he thinks that where his head is on on what we should be doing right now and how we should be thinking about it. What is the Tortoise approach to the Prime Minister being in an intensive care unit?
So it's very difficult, Chris. I think, I had a number of conversations this morning, and yesterday we talked a fair bit about it. I think the difficulty is two things. One is, actually, there is an emotional element to this, which is, can you hear me?
You just dropped out. Carry on.
So there's an emotional element to it. So how do we understand the extent to which we are, many of us, I certainly have felt, extremely unsettled from the moment that actually Boris Johnson was taken into hospital on Sunday night? I thought this is really alarming, and definitely yesterday when he went into intensive care. And what is it? Is it about his kind of sort of boisterous personality that makes you feel vulnerable? Is it the fact that it can hit anyone? Is it the sense of rudderlessness? Or is it just the sort of proximity to someone that we think we know? There's a set of emotions here that I was trying to understand, and that there is possibly a way for us to say something helpful or thoughtful on. And then there's actually just a bunch of noise around what's happening around the Prime Minister. And the truth is, we know really very little, except for the fact that he was taken to hospital. It seems as though he needed oxygen in the car. Clearly, they were very concerned about the state of things last night, about the possibility that he had to go on a ventilator, and what a worrying sign that would be if he did go onto a ventilator, and a slight sense of relief. I don't know whether you got this in the lobby briefing, that they were relieved that he didn't go on a ventilator and it was just oxygen that was used. But obviously it's a really serious situation, and so I think it creates great nervousness. I think the things that we think from a Tortoise point of view, or at least I think, is don't try and, add to tidbits of news. Don't add to all the words that make you feel as though you're reading things but you're not learning anything, but try to give a calm and sensible account of what's actually happening, and try and understand what the implications are for what happens next, because the big choices that the government faces over the next 7 days are A, testing and how to navigate the problems they're having in delivering testing, and B, the terms of the lockdown beyond April the 14th, which is potentially start to loosen the lockdown. I don't think that will happen, or try to manage the extension 2 weeks to 3 weeks, which looks much more likely. Those are big issues for the management of the health crisis, and big issues for the management of the economic crisis. So that's, I think, the approach we're trying to take.
Okay. So the person who's called Jenny's iPhone, you mentioned in the chat the impact on children of school closures and how it might widen divisions. Can we come to you? Jenny?
Hi, yeah. Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, well, basically, I guess I'm just interested in how long we reckon schools will be shut. My boyfriend is currently in Teach First, and so are actually two of my family members, and obviously they work in incredibly deprived areas with kids on free school meals, and probably don't have hugely stable home lives. And it kind of struck me that, I mean, I've been to private school, and if this was happening to me when I was at school, my parents probably could afford some sort of online tutoring, or afford that they'd both be working from home, and be able to teach me. I mean, my mum's a teacher, so that would be pretty helpful. Whereas, if you're in a single parent, kind of much more unstable family setting, you probably can't. So coming back to school in September, children are going to be at all different stages, and yet are they going to be expected to start then from the same place, or like how will that then kind of play out for potentially years to come?
Yeah, I mean, actually, if you do the maths, if we just losing a term and a half is actually quite a big chunk of a child's education. Like, it's a sizable lump of time. You're actually not in school for that long.
Yeah.
And we get all this learning loss stuff as well, that when we know that when kids go away for the summer, they come back basically having forgotten a load of stuff.
Yeah, and it kind of struck me that we don't always think as well about kind of early years learning. So right. I've got, like teachers who are teaching 3 and 4 year olds, and at that age it's quite easy to overlook how important education is in reading and just communication, and really essential even just social skills around being around other children and learning things such as sharing and kind of compromising and stuff like that. Yeah,
that makes sense. Could I ask Tom, so Tom McCallum has issued us a challenge. Is Tom there? Tom sort of said we should look beyond the crisis. I'm just wondering if you could come to you, Tom, and tell us a bit about what you think we should be doing. I sort of instinctively agree with you that we have to sort of stay out of the day-to-day, but it's really hard to not get dragged in.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, coming to you from the global headquarters. Behind you, you see the prop for the videos I'm filming, all the books. Yeah, I think one of the key things is, as Viktor Frankl would say, is our ultimate freedom is our choice how you respond to external stimuli from man's search for meaning. So we have an opportunity to respond rather than react. And at a time when we are all to some degree feeling uncertain and fearful at times, it's really key that Tortoise sticks to the ethos of being a slow news organization and is not reactive. And to Liz's point to me on the chat about the bigger picture on Zoom, the Zoom security issues for regular remote workers, they're non-issues. They really are non-issues. They've already been addressed last Friday. That's already moved on. But the bigger issues are to do with, will we work more remotely? And as a London-centric news organization, what's that going to mean? Are you going to close your newsroom, for example? So what are the big picture things that you can take time and put journalists onto to work at in the weeks and months, so that when the world is ready to hear them, you've already done the work?
Right. The future of work is a thing. I feel like we've expected technology to disrupt the workplace for decades and decades and decades, and we've always felt like actually we quite like being together, we quite like working together. So it will be, I don't know how people will feel at the end of this. Will they like working from home? Will they think, oh, not anymore? I miss the snacks in our office fundamentally.
Well, I thought for you to actually explore, which I'm working with several clients all around the world, is what if you flip the paradigm and said you were a remote organization first, as Jason Fried does in the book Remote, and you only come into London, into central London, to work, for example, to the office, if it's more effective. So what if you completely flip the paradigm and look at that and just start smashing these paradigms? So these are the kind of things you could be looking at with regard to the world of work, because let's get real. It's not going to be acceptable to come into work in the centre of London 5 days a week for quite some time yet. Right. And with that, I'll leave you in peace.
Can I come to Phoebe Davis? Phoebe's one of our regular members, regular visitors. You've been affected by Brockwell Park being closed.
Yeah, so I can't go to my family home, so I'm staying with my boyfriend in Herne Hill at the moment, and because my master's was cancelled, which is great. But yeah, so Brockwell Park is like just down the road, but over the weekend there was Lewisham Council put out the notice that they closed the park on the Sunday, effectively to stop people sunbathing, etc. Saying there was 5,000 people in the park and it was atrocious, but essentially that pushed everyone into the other park that's down the road. So I don't really see how that was productive. We went there and we're like, this is dangerous, like no one wants to be here. We couldn't run because it was so full, because all the people that would have gone to that park just got pushed to that park. But especially in this area of London, there's no garden spaces, so that's the only green spaces in the area. So if you start closing those, then how are you meant to like, look after your mental, physical health at the same time? Yeah, it's lots of shared accommodation, lots of young professionals all living in shared houses. So yeah, not ideal at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see if they do that again, or they do that across London as well, and they close more parks in series, because I just don't see how that's productive at all. So
Martin Ricks, who has his hand up, in fact, there's sort of those two thoughts are sort of quite closely tied to your thought, right? So this should we so Tom's thought about moving to sort of default remote, and these questions about whether the clumsy attempts by councils to try and regulate these spaces are causing unintended consequences. You mean you've written about how you've put in the chat how you sort of wouldn't be that shocked if the productivity falls as we all sort of cope with increasing strain, basically, of this new way of living.
Yeah, so this all stemmed from a conversation I was having with friends I'm working from home, but I'm not properly working from home. I'm still kind of shift working, whereas friends of mine are fully working from home. And the conversation we had is they felt actually we could probably do this, and our bosses are looking at this as a full kind of experiment. And my concern is that's all very well and good for the first few weeks of this, but if this was to go on for another 6, 7, 8 weeks, where would people be with their working from home if the stress and the strain of being locked down is really piling down on them? If, for example, even in the best kind of household where you haven't got any internal problems, you're still going to have children, partners all jostling for your attention, time. And then if you add into that people who've got real like money concerns, marital problems, anything like that, I think you could see productivity fall. And in that case, would bosses then say, this didn't work, we're going to go back to the old way of working, we're not going to try and incorporate this at all into our business? The one thing I would add to that, though, is the good side of this, and I've seen this again from my friends, their companies are really ploughing in the infrastructure and the resources needed. So actually that will all be in place post this. It's just the will. And the other thing I'd add, is working from home shouldn't just be for everyone to work from home. You have your central office maybe and your dispersed workforce, but they can still tap in. That's not there either. So there's kind of a fake experiment in my opinion.
Right. I just put John O'Shea. Hello, John. John's a counsellor in Birmingham. I think still. Yes. Yeah. John, could we? I mean, what you've got? It's the biggest local authority in the country. You're a little way behind London in terms of the curve in terms of infections and everything else. You've just said certainly not looking to close parks in Birmingham. Can I ask what your sort of where you're thinking at the moment is?
I mean, ironically, it's actually literally my job. I'm cabinet member for street scene in parks, so I've got 14 square miles of things to look after. Taking on board what the other contributor said earlier on, that a lot of people, it is their only available green space. Not everybody has a back garden, and actually our experience has been that most people are respecting social distance within the car parks, within our parks. So we're looking to keep it open for as long as we possibly can. We've had to be a real push, and probably directed from central government, to force us to close our parks. Also, on a practical basis, we can't actually close most of them because they are open spaces with no physical gates. What we have done is we've closed down play areas and games areas, again, as far as we can, to avoid becoming points where people can gather and share the joys of coronavirus. But we are acutely aware that with a decent chunk of poverty in Birmingham, that these are people's only open spaces in many cases, and they need that space to get out and get some fresh air and enjoy as much of the spring as they can with social distancing. Also, bear in mind one thing about our numbers is there's been obviously with large local authority in Europe, so whatever Birmingham does, it has big numbers. But also some of the numbers are caused by delay in reporting. So we had some quite high death rate. Our death numbers a couple of days ago, they were delayed reporting rather than anything else. We are tracking behind London, but we haven't reached our peak yet either. We know that.
Can I ask, so to sort of draw together some of those themes, John, that we've been talking about before. So Tom mentioned, this is a moment for us to sort of think again about how we work, as did Martin. do you have any like bandwidth to think about this stuff in government at the moment? Do you have any, because this would entail like changing the way we work means changing the way we're governed as well. Like it means amenities have to change, and the way that we organize our cities has to change. I appreciate it's only been like a month, but is there, you know, how much are you firefighting and how much are you, you know, able to do big thinking?
There isn't the space I doubt in any local authority to look at the big issues beyond this. You know, we are again, speaking across the entire local authority base, in full emergency mode. A lot of what we're doing you can't see. A lot of the stuff we do you don't want to see, because it's not particularly pleasant. But no, we are firefighting and just trying to deal with issues as they arise, and trying to deal with the difference between what government says and what government does. There can be quite a wide gap there.
Right. Thanks ever so much, John. So Hester, you've raised your hand. Hester McCreary. Hello. Hello. What are your thoughts?
Well, on the working from home, working remotely topic, that I know there's a bit in the chat going on saying it's somebody said I've been doing it for 25 years. It takes adjustment. I'm not enjoying this period at all. In fact, I've actually been furloughed from my company. I work for a tech startup, so working from home is it's hard enough to manage. I manage a team of 6 in the office where we use about 10 online software systems, a call center that has 300 inbound calls per day and thousands of communication channels. Working remotely, looking at all of that, you basically end up going mad, is what it is. So the long reach of working remotely for me is quite worrying, because, and it's not just me, it's colleagues I work with now have the same approach, that being a startup, we're all about flexible working. So everybody in the company has had an option to work a day remotely from home anyhow. But we've all agreed that it can be useful if you want to focus on some stuff. But productivity working remotely is really tough. I also know previously from another role I had where I was recruiting in again a flexible startup, that demographics has an impact to play on working remotely. So if you get your sort of middle-aged wife and children at home working remotely, remote worker, they're far more productive than your fresh graduate, flat sharing, working remotely London sort of person, where they're working remotely. You don't actually get as much from them. So it's how long this could go on and what happens afterwards is a bit worrying for me, because I don't think ultimately you can try and do an online community, but it doesn't have the same impact on how you feel, on your mental health and how teams operate.
Right. So you also have to, I mean, part of the function of an office is to teach people as well, right? It's to sort of get these young graduates into
Yeah, hugely. So I've worked in a sort of HR generalist capacity as well for some years, and there's very much, when you talk about the level of emotional intelligence that's involved in modern businesses and understanding people and colleagues, that sort of emotional intelligence reach is near on impossible to get from a remote distance.
Great. Thank you. So Josiah Mortimer, you've made this really good point about what this all means for democracy and how we make this all work.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, you know, in the last week before recess, we saw numbers attending Parliament absolutely plummet. I think they went down to, you know, sort of low dozens, and yet for the start of it, it felt like the parliamentary authorities were kind of acting as if nothing had changed. And of course, you know, at the same time, voters' voices and representation was being consistently undermined by the fact that, you know, our representatives just couldn't attend. It was unsafe for them to do so. So I think this recess is a really good time for us to think about, you know, well, come 21st of April when Parliament's meant to return, what does that actually look like? Can we do a virtual Parliament? You know, there's been some options assessed by the parliamentary authorities now, but that really takes the opposition and government coming together and saying, look, we're going to be responsible and we're going to do something which Parliament is very used to doing, which is modernising and modernising very quickly. And that will involve, looking at things like MPs voting remotely, voting from home, and also sort of Zoom Parliament has been termed, MPs debating online. And all of this is stuff that, our ancient Commons and Lords are totally unused to, but it's something that this crisis has forced them to think about. But I think in terms of broader democratic issues, I think it's sort of raised the uncodified nature of our constitution as well, because, we've seen the confusion over kind of who might govern if the PM is incapacitated. That's RAB. But what is the chain of command for after that? And how does the opposition properly hold the government to account when they've been granted sweeping, enormous new powers, and then Parliament is dissolved for a month? So just a lot of really big questions, which I think a lot of people are struggling to address, which it's vital that we do address them.
Can I come to Jenny McCullough next? She must have known this was coming. Thanks, Josiah, because some of the points you raise, Jenny, it turns out, is actually an actual proper expert on this. And I guess my question for you, Jenny used to be a clerk in the House of Commons and understands more about how Parliament actually functions than anyone else alive. What are you thinking about? What are the barriers to some of this stuff? What are the things where you think, oh, they'll never be able to do that?
So I've no special insight into this, but what I do know is that everybody's working really hard trying to find answers to these questions. I think traditionally a lot has depended on where things happen, but just as in sort of other areas. So, for example, in the law, people are working on veracity of electronic signatures. I think there's a parallel process going on there to try and test what can be done. But I think, everybody sees that Parliament has lagged behind with these things, and although there's a lot more remote working than there used to be, I think, and there's more use of video link. I'm not sure that it was envisaged that it could go fully online. So if you go back to Erskine May, there's things like, well, what do you need in place to signify that Parliament is sitting? Is it enough do we need somebody to go and bring the mace into the chamber and have that filmed? But a lot of these things will just depend on sort of developing some sort of consensus.
Right. So, that's quite hard to do if you're literally can't meet to have the conversation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there is a kind of cultural aspect to it as well, because you can see the difference in approach between the Lords and the Commons. So with the two speakers, for example, so Lord Fowler very publicly made a point of taking the advice and self-isolating, and making the point that he could work from home, whereas I think there was more resistance to taking that, to enacting that in the Commons.
Yeah, I thought the budget statement was nuts, like gathering everyone important in the country into one room together in the eve of a pandemic. Anyway, there we go.
Yeah, so it looks completely nuts now, but I suppose when it happened, the situation was still developing. But I think it just shows that that Parliament and a lot of institutions don't work at that speed yet to be able to react. But yeah, I think you look at those pictures now and it just does seem crazy.
Megan Kenyon raises the delightful point that we could cut the cost of the renovations by moving online for a while. Actually, I mean, maybe the real innovation in this will be not moving the Parliament to like Bradford or somewhere, but abolishing Parliament altogether as a physical place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody just write in. Publish the documents.
Yeah, exactly. That's all we need. Sean Jones, can I come to you? The one of the questions that I think is, we've had this questions about furloughing. So when reporters go to the United States, we're obliged to travel on a visa on a travel visa, on a working visa rather, because we are they don't fundamentally trust if the building falls down that we won't go and try and report on it, because we kind of can't switch off. Like, are you not going to use the information you learn when you're traveling here? And so I've been sort of puzzling about what furloughing means for me. You know, would mean for me. What's your you've got a load of other questions about what furloughing means in general.
Have I?
Yeah.
I don't. Well, furloughing is not a UK concept, so I'm not surprised that you talk about experience in America. It's effectively, to employment law, is a brand new word. Probably heard it 20 times in 20 years. We used to talk about a thing called layoff, which is a temporary suspension from work in circumstances where you may or may not be entitled to be paid. A layoff seems to have come to mean, in common parlance, being dismissed, which is in fact the opposite of what it means. So we're all kind of struggling to get our heads around quite what the government has in mind. But what it seems to be is that if you can agree it, employer and employee, you're temporarily suspended from work, and in return you're entitled to a minimum of 80% of your usual monthly pay, excluding certain pay elements, or £2,500, whichever is the less. But there are attached to it a series of kind of weird, stringent conditions, one of which is, to pick up on a point that came up from someone who spoke earlier, you're absolutely not allowed to do any work whilst you're furloughed. And there's nothing in the guidance which suggests that there is what we would ordinarily expect, which would be a de minimis principle that says, look, if someone phones you up and says, can't find the file, where is it? Or do you mind just having a quick word with a client to reassure them that we're still going? You can't do anything which is of value to your employer. And if you do, your furlough comes to an end, and the impact of that is that your employer won't be able to recover the money that they paid for you. So this is the sort of scheme that gets devised not by employment lawyers, but by people who work at the HMRC, which is what is unsettling employers. So I spend a lot of time with employers at the moment, essentially giving them advice, which amounts to being a bookmaker. They will say, if we do this, what is the prospect that the HMRC will come back in a few months' time and say we've made some technical failure in the way in which we've made a payment, or the amount of which we've made a payment, as a result of which we can't recover any of this money and we go under. And there are two things to bear in mind. The first is that the scheme is being written on the hoof. So the current revised guidance is full of holes and apparent contradictions. So the chances of tripping over something is still pretty high. The second is that traditionally the HMRC has an amazing reputation for taking very pedantic points. So you probably didn't see it, but the last couple of years, if you were a supermarket and you paid people on an annualized hours basis, the HMRC turned up at people's doors and said, how many days do you think there are in a year? And if you gave the answer 365, the HMRC says that's not right. There's 365 and a quarter days in a year. So if you set salary by reference to 365 days, you've breached the terms of the scheme, and your entire way of paying your staff has fallen apart. And you may now owe a lot of them a lot of national minimum wage that you thought you had covered. So it's an instant, sensible response. It's new and unsettling. And there's every chance that in about 7 or 8 months, it's all going to unravel in a very bloody way when the HMRC starts auditing claims. But it just seems to be something that absolutely has to be done now to keep money in people's pockets and keep businesses running.
It's definitely got the, it's sort of, one of the things I've read about last week was that I'm sort of still surprised that we had this sudden shock to the world economy. So it sort of froze up overnight, more or less, 13 years ago. And yet we still don't have a sort of high-speed toolbox for the Treasury. And I don't really understand why. I mean, why they hadn't thought, not necessarily about furloughing schemes, but this is more broadly, there hasn't been a lot of thought about what our sort of high-speed toolkit should look like in a big crisis. I was wondering if I could come actually now to, sorry, I'm just scrolling to find the person who I lost. The Margot Lunnan. Margot? Are you there? Hello, Margot. So you sort of, you don't use the word serendipity, but one of the things you sort of point out is that there's a lot of accidentalness in the working environment, that we bump into people, we have casual encounters.
Yes, I had my doubts about moving the Lords to York for that reason, because an awful lot of problem solving, particularly between people who are theoretically on opposed sides, happens casually in corridors. And I just don't see how that can be done digitally. Right.
I mean, so the danger would be that we end up with, so it's almost like taking the problem of having us all in filter bubbles and multiplying it up by moving everything online.
Yeah.
I see that. James has raised his hand. Can we go to James Harding?
I just wanted to go back, if I could, Chris, on the thing that I think is raised by Dave Taylor in his message in the chat, which is about what happens next, and actually touch on the point about the piece that you ran at the beginning of last week, the fragile states piece, right? And I think the reason why I think this conversation is interesting is that there are two really big and different conversations that are happening about what happens next. There are some of them which are, how are we going to take forward the ways in which we've come to operate now? So what happens about travel? What happens about Zoom calls and remote working? How does it change kind of the functioning of Parliament? Those kinds of things. And I think that will definitely happen. And my instinct is that it won't gather momentum over time. It will lose momentum over time after we return to work. The question that's different, and is also, I guess, included in Dave's point about whether we should run a series of think-ins probably towards the end of April that really do ask the question, what should happen next? Is there also these enormous questions about the way our country and the world runs that are thrown up by this? So, your question about the fragile state, my entire adult life, we've lived with the idea that a good organization runs efficiently, right? Your piece about fragile states suggested that not just a good organization, but a good government, even a good country, should be measured by its capacity, right? That's a really big and different change in what we expect of industries, engineering know-how, and government. But actually, this is the thing that I find myself really wondering about, is we've also seen what governments can do when they put their minds to it as regards money, right? That they can print money, that money is available to them to help fix the problems they want to fix. And so I do suddenly ask myself, well, what are we going to do about a big and different set of ideas? We started Tortoise with this sort of sense that the politics of left and right of the last 100 years had kind of run its course. It does seem this is a moment where it could reset, whether it's around the planet or around technology or around, quality of life and longer lives, all those things we talked about before. That's the bit I worry about us losing. I worry in the rush to get back to work, when it does happen, the moment of reflection and the opportunity for a reset that's really available now, that gets lost. And so I don't know how we as Tortoise manage, if you like, both the gradual change, but also the step change, and trying to articulate that.
Yeah, I think one of the questions is going to be whether, as Tom suggested, we should sort of see this as a moment, as an opportunity for a step change, or whether we basically don't have it works the other way around, right? Whether it's, we don't have the bandwidth to keep the show on the road and design something new. So whether things will sort of actually keep going on sort of pretty similar grounds, if you like, around a bigger state or something. Claire, Selby, can we come to you? So Claire, you've sort of expressing like unease about the exit strategy. I mean, I guess that's the next big thing we don't really know is how we get out of it. I don't know if people have seen the Neil Ferguson, not the historian, the epidemiologist, has been saying, basically shrugging about how we end this thing. what's your concern?
It just seems way too soon to be thinking about that. We're sort of 3 weeks in, and it just worries me that people are already thinking, oh good, I just want a date for when this goes back to normal, whereas not realizing that this is never going to go back to normal. Like everyone said, we're all learning. It's like we're in some big experiment. We're all learning how to work, how to live differently. And I can't see the point of thinking, right, it's going to be normal by June. I know it's, people will automatically strive for normality if they're in a sort of panic mode. But I think you have to be much more zen about it. And I agree with what James is saying about this pause and this reflection and this recess. And I think the longer you have to think about these things, the more good will come from them. I don't think anyone can come up with solutions immediately. And I think, like James was saying at the beginning, the reality is starting to hit. Our Prime Minister is in hospital. Whether or not that's, whatever's happening, we're not being told the full story for reasons or not, do we know? But that shouldn't really be the focus. It should be sort of working together and trying to solve the situation now, rather than looking at, oh God, when are we going to be out of this? I find it really not a futile wish, but just, can we not deal with the here and now rather than worrying about when we're going to be able to go out of our house and go to Sainsbury's again normally?
So Chris L, if we go to Chris L, he's raised a thought in the comments. It's actually quite similar about how we should be thinking about this as like an inflection moment that we can. He doesn't use that word. That's me being pretentious. About how we should use this as a moment. Is he still with us? Has he made his contribution and left? That is allowed. But okay. But in the chat, he sort of says, I understand why everyone's looking for Netflix recommendations, but we risk waiting out the crisis, then longing to go back to normal without using the time to consider how you might improve things in the future. I have to confess to feeling like the world's on fire at the moment. I sort of don't feel like I've got enough bandwidth to think about how this potentially, where we want this to go. I slightly worry that we might be trying to do too much to do that stuff. On Richard Walmsley, actually, you've raised a thought, if we go to Richard, that has occurred to me, which is about job security and the rise of job security as an issue. It's one of the things that's been quite striking in this process has been that the people who you'd think would be safe are not, as safe as you'd think. The people who, who is secure and who isn't has become a bigger thing. Can we go to Richard? Is Richard there? Or has he not got a webcam? Possibly not. Oh. There we are. Hello, Richard.
Hi. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. Yes, yeah.
Okay, I have a blank screen. Yeah, I think it's really tricky. I was having the same conversation that we've touched on a couple of times about which sectors, which kind of areas benefit from this, and which ones might we be more drawn to. So are people going to prioritize that security of their jobs, of the sectors that seem like they have more potential based on what we're experiencing at the moment? Or is it, on the other hand, that we just have to adapt to this as being our new normal, and integrate that more into the way we are day to day? I think I also commented that James said when we go back to work, which I think is quite a telling phrase, because it hankers after that normality of a place of work and somewhere that has that security, but maybe that's not our reality anymore.
Right. I mean, it's been, I'm one of 5 children, and it's been quite striking to go down the list of my all wish for one of my sisters is a doctor who is fine for employment, but maybe has other issues going on in her life at the moment. But trying to work out what the what you'd advise a 21-year-old to do at the moment is not, you know, it's not straightforward at all. I wonder if we may be moving to a world where we will have to save a lot more and think about a lot more about sort of insuring ourselves if the state won't step in. So Gertej, you've expressed excitement about about reshaping where things are. You think this is you're firmly in this is an opportunity camp.
Yeah, no, I think the whole big questions that we've had, and you guys have addressed some of them on technological change, AI, and I work in that space, the impact of AI, the impact of technology, and also the climate change stuff. We now can raise those questions without the legacy of where we are, because where we are is somewhere new. And I think, therefore, the conversations can be a lot more honest about shaping up what that means. I mean, for you guys, I mean, I know James, so there's been this interesting thought for me in the background in relation to news, which is, well, why do you have a newsroom? You know, why isn't there just a backbench and the editor and actually your journalists spread across the world with a platform and a technology that enables you to do things? And you can go through multiple different industries in that sense as well, which stops you traveling, stops, you know, all of the stuff that will support, you know, a better climate environment. There's a cost to it, but I think there's a chance now to really set things differently without necessarily the constraints of legacy thinking and legacy politics even.
Right. I mean, so can I bring in, while you've been speaking, one of our, Josh Shah has spoken, and he's given actually, I think, I'm not saying the opposite answer, but Josh, you're so you're not yet at university.
No, I'm going this year.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed, man.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully.
So how are you feeling about it all?
I'm obviously excited about the university experience and I guess graduating and hoping to find a job, but I feel like if we do start to work from home, I'm not really looking forward to that, because I don't know, I was looking forward to the office life and working in London, working in a big city, but that might not even be possible now. So,
right. Do you know what sectors you want to work in?
Financial sector maybe. I'm doing PPE, so I guess I'm quite interested in international development, but even then, restricted travel, I don't know how that will affect me. So I have a feeling that all types of jobs will be changed and not many available for new graduates.
Right.
Like myself, yeah.
Well, good luck. Good luck.
Thank you.
We appreciate the bird song as well.
Just sitting outside.
One of the things I'm sort of trying to get my head around is education, actually, which is I'm a former education reporter, and one of the things that's amazing about education is it's so rhythmic, right? So one of the things about it is, you know, when the year starts, you know, when you have to do your hiring, we know when people leave, you know, when people turn up, and you can we built these sort of deeply intermeshed systems. You know, kids leave school in June of one year and they start at university or at college in September, October of the next year. You know, these things are all interleaved, and actually just taking out a chunk of a year is really disruptive and really painful. And one of the questions will be whether we start thinking again about whether we need to uninterleave those systems, whether we need to make it easier for people to start a bit later, start mid-year, pick up credits, you know, move around. There's been talk about sort of portable qualifications for years and being able to sort of move your modules around. But that would be a thing that right now would be really helpful, that bit of flexibility. If any of you have thoughts, just to remind you can raise your hand so I don't have to pounce on you in your kitchens. One of the things that one of my colleagues pointed out a second ago, actually, my colleague Jack, was that where is he? Let me not misquote him. I've lost him. This is very professional, you can see. Jack, where are you? Are you there?
I'm here.
So one of the things you point out was that the Beveridge report was written during the Second World War, like at a moment of crisis. But, I mean, do you think that we have anything like the capacity to see the future in the way that they could?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, but we also, you know, are we fixing? So we've cancelled COP in Glasgow, which on the one hand makes sense. We can't all. Doesn't seem like it's likely we're all going to be able to get together in a small room or even a large room. But does that mean that we're putting on hold all plans and technological solutions to solve climate change? I mean, even during the Second World War, there was the 1944 Chicago Convention, which basically still sets many of the rules for international air travel. They did that in 1944. D-Day happened in 1944. So it seems to me that we need to be incredibly ambitious in how we want to solve coronavirus, but at the same time, we've done more than one thing at once before, and I think we shouldn't be so unambitious not to try again.
I mean, I do wonder whether part of the gap between now and then was that we have one of the things we've reduced is the ability of the state to do more than one thing at a time. Basically, we used to have a much bigger policymaker to deliver a ratio when we were delivering a lot less stuff. It's quite easy for like a posh old man like William Beveridge to sit around and pick up stuff when he wasn't actually worrying about how he's going to keep the job centres open. I wonder if there's anyone who thinks that as a sort of specific things that we haven't covered at the moment, you think we should actually be looking for and looking into. I'm obviously, there are sort of some eternal things here about social care and about how we run our labour market, how we operate the world of work. Tom mentioned inequality earlier as a sort of an issue coming through the back end of this. But what are the other things in the big picture that we've not yet sort of covered off? Tessa, my colleague Tessa. Can we go to Tessa? Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I mean, kind of back to the general view of are we being under ambitious with what we think we can do at the moment, and Jack's point about how crises can build extraordinary things out of them. And I was thinking about, you know, the UN being born out of, or League of Nations, and then the UN being born out at the end of the Great Wars. And it struck me that what's so different about those previous situations is we're not healing wounds following world wars. We're actually all in the same boat. And I don't know how many people have had the chance to read the letter to the G20 that was circulated, I think earlier today or late yesterday, I can't remember. But, you know, this chance to reset and ask ourselves what our responsibilities as a global community are and should be and could be, just seems a massive, we haven't had to stop the way we behave, we haven't had to come together so collaboratively, globally, ever, I don't think. And so to miss that opportunity would seem like a real tragedy.
Right. I mean, I have to confess to some slight scepticism.
Really, Chris?
I know. It's so out of character. About the what we can do collaboratively, and I slightly worry that what we can agree collaboratively will usually be sort of motherhood and apple pie. And one of the things we saw in the financial crisis was people were willing to sign up to press releases with big numbers if other people were going to put the big numbers into the things. You know, they're always happy for other people to do stuff. So I'm slightly like, I sort of think we have to be, yeah.
Well, we're not putting you in charge then.
I get things done, if only locally. Can we go to Hester again? I see you raised your hand. Hester, hang on. There we are.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, one potential subject to maybe try and cover is a change in approach and response that's happening in the paramedic scene. So one of my close friends who lives only 10 minutes up the road from me, she's a paramedic in the Islington Camden bunch, and I know a few of them. And I spoke with her at the weekend, and obviously it's really tough going at the moment for anyone working in the NHS, and for paramedics especially. It was quite distressing to see her because she's been working flat out, and it's really hard. But one of the things she was saying, and that her and her colleagues are saying, is that their whole approach to paramedic care over this crisis has sort of completely turned around. They're now doing almost the opposite to what they've been trained to do. Whereas usually if they get a call to somebody with, breathing difficulties or chest pains or things like that, they're taught up to, monitor oxygen, assess things. They usually pack them off to hospital for an ECG and things like that. But unless it's a specific, thought corona case, there are lots of people with chest pains for heart reasons or anxiety and things like that. They're now doing the absolute opposite, which is to say, we don't go to hospital, more care at home. People in end of life care as well, who would usually be taken to hospital, they're actually having to say to people, if this person might be dying in the next few days. If we take him to hospital now, he'll be isolated on his own, he'll die alone, you can't see him. How about we're not going to do that? We are advising you to hold his hand, sort of back to a sort of more old-fashioned, almost Victorian deathbed sort of style of hold his hand, see him through his last days. So there's a massive change in how paramedics are operating. I think that could be an interesting story or piece for Tortoise to look at, as how a shift in paramedic care.
I think there's definitely already a broader thing that's a part about the changing way we've delivered primary care over the last month. So community care. So GPs are the traditional gatekeepers for it. They are already. They basically, because there've been a collapse in normal cases, they've been able to sort of actually start putting in place infrastructure to try and cope with the coronavirus stuff. And actually, there's been a massive surge in telemedicine. So that we've for years and years and years been trying to get people to see their GP online, and finally, this crisis appears to be one of the things that will do it. So that may be actually quite a big, important, lasting legacy in the UK. I should wrap up. I noticed that we're almost at the end of our allotted hour. I think the big thing to take away from that is that we have to think about what comes next. There've been lots of comments about what life looks like afterwards, and about the benefits or disbenefits or costs of working from home, working remotely. I appreciate this has been a conversation among people who are generally working from home, which is why we're able to do this. And that I think it was an unspoken, we will have to appreciate that what we're talking about is stuff that for lots of people is not a possibility. There are a lot of people whose jobs necessarily involve them being in a place, standing in front of a machine, being with other people. But for the big chunk of the UK economy that is potentially remotable, if that is a word, there are a lot of issues being raised here. I think one of the questions we have to start thinking about is, if in a world where there's much less commuting, what does that mean for urban design? In a world where, in a world where there's less commuting, what is it that we need? What are the kinds of utilities and amenities that we need that are different to a world in which we're all piped into these city centres? I think there are a lot of really sort of significant points about how we can make ourselves more robust to some of this stuff. I think the Josiah's thoughts on what you do with the future of democratic representation is a big one, and I find it really funny if we can force MPs to be on Zoom so they have to barrack their own computer screens. I think that might be quite enjoyable. But Yeah, thank you ever so much for coming. There is a, I have to point out to you, my colleague Emma is about to flash up a slide, which will explain that, yeah, the recording of this will soon be available on the app. If you're not a member at this point, you can download the app and start a 4-week trial. Our digital thinkings are open if you bring them along. We had a modest security issue. That means that it's you'll see there was a bit of rope line management at the beginning, you may have noticed, which was to stop that. But it was yeah, thank you ever so much all for coming, for giving up your lunches. I didn't actually spot anyone eating anything that made me really jealous, which has been a feature of these previously. So that is the challenge for next time, is to try and really make me hungry. Thanks ever so much, and I'll see you next time.